Let's do this. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. It's time for another exciting lightning talk. I'm Parag Katkar, your host for tonight. I'm the Senior Director of Enterprise Solutions at Enrhythm, and we have a lot of exciting content lined up for you in the upcoming weeks. Our lightning talks are hosted every Thursday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, one of our practice area consultants speaks on the latest and greatest technology trends in the industry that will keep you learning and growing in your career. And this week, Austin Cornelio, who is an experienced tech lead with us, will give an overview of RFCs. So, what are RFCs? RFCs are requests for comments, and Austin will show how to implement a standardized way for your dev team to collaborate, architect, and design new features based on the input from these RFCs. So I'm super excited for this talk. So without further ado, let's get it started, Austin.
Yeah, thanks, Prague. Hey, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to come to my lightning talk. Pretty excited. Just a quick introduction for myself, who I am. Prague stated, Austin Cornelio. Been with Enrhythm for quite a while. Started back in 2015 and have led teams at American Express, MasterCard, and currently I'm over at Goldman. I have personally benefited off of RFCs a few times over the projects that I've worked on. So I thought it would be kind of interesting to kind of share some experiences, go through, what an RFC is and how it can be beneficial to you and your teams. So let's get started. What exactly is an RFC anyways? So RFC, request for comments. And I quote, this is from Wikipedia, get this one out of the way. A request for comments is a publication in a series from the principal technical development and standard setting bodies for the internet, most prominently the Internet Engineering Task Force. So in other words, an RFC is agreed upon document that you can use for your team when you're on the precipice of implementing some new features in one's code base. Usually these things, RFCs are, there's some sort of document. 99% of the time, I've seen them as markdown files. So I'll be speaking of them in that context. So the next question you might be asking is, when do I need to use one of these things? I would say that really kind of depends. They're very popular within the open source community. I have not used them in that context. I've always used them part of a closed source private team. So it kind of depends on what you're working on, who you're working for, etc. But some high level guidelines are, upon any moderately complex or new feature, you have an architecture change, contract change, something like that. A good example that comes to my mind, when I was on the MasterCard team, we were tasked with rolling out and designing our own custom A/B testing platform. So this, I think, was the first time that we tried out RFCs on the team. We built a pretty in-depth one that kind of explored, how we would do such a thing. They're also seen in some cases, maybe you have an open source project and you have a hot fix and you need to do some, kind of real-time exploration and investigation on it. You could probably also use it in that case as well. So when should you not use one? Really, any day-to-day MR, something that is a pretty straightforward change, anything that goes against the previous list would probably be where I would probably not consider one of these guys. So let's look at the template next. As I mentioned, we're essentially talking about a markdown file here, and they all have a structure that one needs to follow. That's one of the most important, concepts of the RFC. So next, I'm going to dive into, exactly what that format might look like at a high level. So obviously, the first thing you're going to want is some sort of title, right? A summary, like what is the RFC? Like what are we trying to do here? What is the motivation? Any design details. So that can be, maybe some pseudocode, some high level ideas worked out. It really depends like how deep you want to go into the design detail here. I've done it a few different ways. So it really depends on what you're looking to solve here, but definitely some sort of maybe high level API design. If we're dealing with a contract, maybe like a data model or such would be good to go into detail here. Next, you want to start thinking about the drawbacks. Every time, you're looking at making a impactful change or something that isn't, entirely obvious on how to approach it right off the bat, like you're going to want to also look at the drawbacks and what could it break? Like maybe why do we not want to do this, this sort of thing, just so you're looking at it from all angles. Then next, you would start to figure out the rationale and any alternatives. Likewise, it's also good to explore as many approaches as possible. And admittedly, for me, this is one of the things that I think I like the most about an RFC, is that it kind of forces you to think about any alternatives when you're coming up, you're trying to solve a problem. It's really important, obviously, to think about all the possible ways to do it, especially within, the world of software engineering. Has there been any prior attempts? Has anybody tried this before? This is an important one when you're talking about, maybe like a big enterprise company where there's lots of silos, and often you'll find that the same problem might have been solved before. So it's also really good to think about who might have done this before. Maybe someone from their team has done it before. Like definitely do a deep dive into that whole thing. And then lastly, any unresolved questions. Maybe you got to a point when there's still some things that you haven't been able to answer. So it's good to document it at that point. So all that being said, now we know what an RFC is. We know the template, the ultimate form that it takes, but there's also a process that one needs to adhere to make, everything effective as possible here. So next I'm going to go into the process here with the RFC. So at a high level, this is basically what it looks like to get a moderate or substantial change into the code base. First and foremost, if your team is already obviously on board with this and you know that you want to consider RFCs, like I said before, it's not applicable to everything. So let's say we've identified a project or piece of functionality that we want to build and we want an RFC. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to have to get the template somewhere. Like there's a million different places you can go online. You can get the template. Really not that big of a deal. Maybe you already have one accessible to you, but step one, get the template. Give it a meaningful name. Usually, it looks something like prefixed with some sort of number 000. This could be the first one we've ever made, and then the feature name. Oftentimes you'll see that the RFCs actually live inside of their own directory within your code base. So they're pretty easily found, at the top level. And then fill every section like we talked about previously. And then when you feel confident that you've gone through everything, figured out, all the details, you're going to want to open a MR or a pull request to the remote repository for review. So at this point, this is where the collaboration really starts. We all know what a pull request is, obviously. Same thing here. We're opening up an MR and the team is getting notified and everybody can chime in, leave comments. The whole goal is to ultimately come to consensus on what the proposal is. It's important to get as much conversation going on these things as possible. It's kind of one of the most important parts of it. So once the team has agreed on the RFC, it's essentially active, and that allows it to go to the ultimate stage. So what happens next? You start to think about what the actual life cycle of this thing is at this point. So now that it's active, you can do a few different things. Probably the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start working it into your roadmap, go through the sprint planning process, figure out how it works within, the plan to build out whatever you're working on. But just because it's active doesn't mean that it's also 100% going to get implemented. So that's kind of an important thing. And this is where the priorities and the whole, team thing comes into place. So next, sorry, I lost my train of thought there a little bit. Not too late to change things. I worked on a RFC for the team at Goldman a little over a month ago, and it was actually a really good kind of experiment, because what we were trying to solve was we were trying to refactor a data model that we have that provides our real-time data grids with filter definitions. So we have a lot of tabular data, and there's lots of filtering going on every time. So the backend sends us a list of filter components, and we wanted to change that around a little bit. So we came up with a way to do this. Come to find out that the original approach, would have taken way too much time to really implement, because it touched lots of pieces of the code. So we actually had to go back and revise the RFC once we got into the weeds. So kind of an interesting experience with that. Gets you to a certain point, exposes you to parts of the code and that you might have to change. I was coming into this project at a point where it was already built out quite a bit, so I was still coming up to speed, learning the code base and everything like that. So the RFC was a pretty good tool for me. That being said, next section, we can talk a little bit about implementing the RFC. What does that actually mean, right? So I touched upon it a little bit in the previous slide, but once there's agreement and it's in the plan to actually build out the functionality in question, like anybody can do it. It doesn't have to be the person who came up with the RFC or the original author of the RFC. It can be really any engineer. And from there you go. You can build out your feature, and hopefully it's successful. So I put together a few useful links. Like I said, there's many things. I mean, you used to do a quick Google search on this stuff, and you'll find that like a lot of open source projects are working this way. For the UI folks on the team, React has one that's pretty interesting. NPM has one. If you need a template, I linked it here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That concludes my talk on RFCs. We can open the floor up for any questions if anybody has any.